There is food growing in the sea right now. Not seaweed, not fish, a tree. It rises from saltwater where no ordinary plant can survive. Its roots arch out of the tide like fingers reaching from the deep. Its seeds do not wait for soil. They germinate while still attached to the branch, already alive, already reaching downward, as if they know that the ground will never quite be ready for them. For thousands of years, coastal people across West Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Americas gathered what fell from these trees. They boiled the propagules, they dried them, they ground them into flour. They survived on them during storms, famines, and floods when everything else had drowned. Then the world modernized, and this food disappeared. Not because it failed, because it could not be owned. This is Ancient Food Files, a channel dedicated to the knowledge that did not survive the transition to industrial food. The plants that fed civilizations for millennia before being deemed inconvenient, unscalable, or simply too wild to monetize. If this kind of knowledge matters to you, consider subscribing. Not to grow this channel, to preserve what is documented here. Each video is an archive entry, a record, because once the last person who remembers stops speaking, the memory becomes something else entirely. It becomes myth, and myths are easily dismissed. Today, we open the file on the mangrove propagule, the edible seed of a coastal forest that once fed the margins of the world. The mangrove is not one tree, it is a category of trees, more than 80 species that have independently learned to breathe in salt and stand in water. They grow where rivers meet the sea, in the brackish, silted zone where the land is neither solid nor liquid. In the Malay archipelago, coastal communities have known this forest for at least 4,000 years. The word mangrove itself likely descends from the Malay mangi, folded through Portuguese into a word that lost most of its meaning in the translation. In the original, there was no single name for the tree, because it was not treated as a single thing. There were names for each species, each mood of the tide, each stage of the propagule. There was a name for the moment when the seeds fell, and a name for the season when they were gathered. In the Sundarbans, the vast delta forest shared between India and Bangladesh, the Munda and Bawali fishing communities spoke of the mangrove not as a plant, but as a living architecture, a house made of roots, a forest that stood between them and the sea. In West Africa, along the coasts of Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, and the Niger Delta, the red mangrove, Rhizophorum mangle, was woven into the food calendar. Its propagule, long and tapered like a green javelin, was not a delicacy, it was a staple, a dependable protein when the harvest was uncertain and the water was too high to plant anything else. These are not folklore, these are knowledge systems, encoded in practice, passed through the hands of women processing food at tidal margins, through the mouths of elders naming the stages of the seed, through the quiet memory of survival. The mangrove propagule is a biological anomaly. Most seeds wait. They dry, they harden, they go dormant until conditions improve. The propagule does the opposite. It germinates on the tree while still connected to the mother plant. This process, called vivipary, from the Latin for live birth, means the seedling has already begun before it ever touches the ground. When it finally detaches and drops, it falls into salt water, not soil. It can survive for over a year floating in the ocean. It lands, it anchors within hours. It does not ask permission from the soil because it does not require it. The propagule of Rhizophora mucronata, the loop-rooted mangrove found across the Indo-Pacific, can reach 30 centimeters in length. It contains a compressed embryo, dense with tannins, carbohydrates, and proteins, packed inside a hull tough enough to survive months of saltwater transit. The tannins are the challenge. Astringent, bitter, and present in significant quantities, they are the tree's protection against predation. But tannins can be processed. Leaching in water removes them, roasting reduces them, boiling transforms them. Indigenous processing knowledge across every coastal culture that used this food developed the precise technique needed to render it edible. It was not a coincidence. It was accumulated precision, the kind of precision that takes centuries to build and one generation of forgetting to lose. What remains after processing is a starchy, high tannin-reduced flour with meaningful caloric density. In conditions of food scarcity, flood, storm, the failure of staple crops, the propagule was not a fallback. It was the plan. History has a way of recording catastrophes in grain prices and government dispatches. It rarely records what people actually ate when the grain ran out. In 1876 and 1877, the Great Madras Famine killed an estimated 5.5 million people across South India. The colonial administration's response was to restrict food movement to maintain market prices. In the Godavari Delta and along the Tamil Nadu coast, those who survived documented cases, in letters and regional accounts, of coastal communities subsisting on what the forest gave freely: mangrove propagules, tidal roots, the food that required no irrigation, no storage, no permission from landlords or grain merchants. In the Philippines during the Japanese occupation of the early 1940s, populations along the Visayas coasts and in the mangrove-edged towns of Palawan fell back on coastal foraging when supply lines collapsed. Oral testimonies recorded decades later by Filipino ethnobotanists describe the propagules of Rhizophora apiculata as part of the survival repertoire: bitter, laborious to process, but available, abundant, and free. In the mangrove coasts of Guinea-Bissau, during the regional droughts of the 1970s and early 1980s, ethnographic records compiled by Portuguese researchers documented women continuing to process mangrove seeds in the traditional manner: extended boiling, multiple water changes, sun-drying, because the rice crop had failed and the propagule had not. The dates are specific. The events are documented. The plant fed people at the exact moments when civilization's systems failed them. It asked nothing in return, except that someone remember how to use it. The mangrove forest began disappearing in the 20th century at a rate that has no historical precedent in coastal ecology. Between 1980 and 2005, the world lost approximately 1/5 of all mangrove cover. In some regions of Southeast Asia, the losses exceeded 50%. Shrimp aquaculture drove much of it. Coastal development drove more. The logic was simple. A mangrove forest produces nothing marketable. A shrimp farm produces an export commodity. The accounting was easy. The accounting was wrong. But the propagule as food did not disappear only because the forests were cleared. It disappeared because the knowledge was made to feel unnecessary before the forest was gone. The arrival of commercial rice, subsidized grain aid, and modern market food infrastructure across coastal West Africa and Southeast Asia in the mid-20th century accomplished something quiet and profound. It reclassified what counted as food. Rice was modern. Propagules were poverty. A child who ate mangrove,